but tell us about those cases that you didn't work on, that you got involved with as an activist, as opposed to being the family's attorney, that you were just there because you supported the movement.
Well, it's interesting because recently I marched in the attempt to get a independent prosecutor in the Deborah Dana case. And it came to me that, you know what? Here I am marching in the Bronx. Almost 20 years ago in the Bronx, Amadou Diallo was killed in a surge of 41 bullets, just going for his wallet to show his ID. From Diallo to Dana, nothing much seems to have changed in the Bronx.
Amen.
And that is a indictment of the system that exists today in which this is happening, and whether it's improved training, which is a point that was made in the Wally Camara case. That's the case where Wally was a hardworking West African clerk in a grocery store. He was killed when a robber grabbed a gun out of a cop's holster and shot and killed him. The fact of the matter is, what we do as lawyers is not just get damages for victims. We also try to get change. And in this case, as a result of the fact that the holsters that were being used by a significant number of police officers in this city were ones in which it was easier to get a gun out of as a perpetrator than new holsters which are being given to new recruits. The police department, not too long after Wally Camara was killed, came out with a decision. All police officers are now going to have these new holsters, which it's not as easy to get a gun out of. That's a positive change. Perhaps we've saved some lives by focusing on that problem.
That's a victory.
And the issue of training, that the police officers with that particular holster, the training was a judo move, which is almost impossible to implement. So the training had to be improved as well. So we have new holsters, hopefully, to prevent other lives from being lost. And the same thing is true about so many of these tragedies in which victims die through no fault of their own. It's an issue as well as police having to have the intellectual ability to understand that in many circumstances it's not necessary to use your gun. In the Dana case, clearly the other police officers that were there had tasers out. They didn't use the tasers. He had a taser available. Why shoot and kill a 66-year-old woman because she has a baseball bat? That is not what should be happening in our society today. And it's now in the hands of the Bronx District Attorney. The Attorney General did not take jurisdiction because of the requirement in the statute, in the executive order issued by the governor, requiring the Attorney General only to come in unarmed civilian cases. There's an issue whether the bat meant she was armed or not.
And just to be clear with the Deborah Dana issue, the NYPD patrol guide stated that when an officer is dealing with a mentally ill person, they should keep them confined to an area and wait for emergency services to come. Deborah Dana was confined to her home. Emergency services were on the way. So that police officer should not have been in the room with her. That situation should never have happened if he were acting under the guise of his guidelines. Okay, so he was already in the wrong. The mayor said he failed. The police commissioner said he failed. There should be no delay. Justice should be just as swift as when a black person commits the crime. Now, personally, myself, Hawk Newsome, and Black Lives Matter New York are in front of the district attorney's office every morning at 8:45 a.m. That's 198 East. That's 198 East 161st Street in the Bronx. If anyone out there wants to join us, you've been out there before, and there's been many members of the community. And while we're standing outside, her office is just right across from the criminal courts. You see the definition of swift justice in the criminal court. You see blacks and Latinos waiting on line to go before a judge. However, when there are cops, there are these delays. And it makes no sense to me. It nauseates me because we get swift justice, but there's always justice delayed when it comes to police officers. Now, I'm talking about me being out there on the front lines. In many cases, my team on the front lines, there are a lot of activists here in the city, okay? Now, activists, they have a problem with settlements. They think that there's more to be gained from litigating these matters. Could you tell us about settlements versus litigation and the power of each to bring about serious change in the system?
Well, first of all, we as attorneys have a responsibility to our clients first and to a cause as well, but the client comes first. That's something I learned from Johnny Cochran when I worked with him in the Louima case and cases all over the country. You always got to think of the client first. So it's ultimately the client's decision whether they want to resolve a matter through settlement. Now, you say litigation or settlement. Many times it's a combination of both. We start lawsuits in our cases. We view a trial as the ultimate end of the process in which we're representing clients, victims. But if along the way an offer is made that a client wants to accept, and in many cases these are multi-million-dollar offers, it's really up to the client
And these are poor people.
to make that decision whether they want to take a chance with a jury, because the one thing I've learned in 40 years of actually practicing law is you never know what a jury is going to do. So the issue becomes, what does the client want to do? What is the client entitled to? Many times it's families of loved ones who've lost a father, and there's young children that have to be supported. So the decision is a very serious one to make, whether one takes a jury verdict or one resolves a case through settlement. But it doesn't mean that the case is not being litigated. Many cases are settled, resolved during the litigation, during the trial, after all the evidence is in, before the jury goes out to deliberate. That happens in many situations once the evidence is out there. But I think it's really important for Black Lives Matter to keep shining a spotlight on wrongdoing, on what's actually going on in the city. By you being out in front of the DA's office in the Bronx, as the DA makes a decision as to whether or not a grand jury is going to be impaneled. Just so the public understands, a grand jury is a group of people from the community who make a decision whether someone should be charged with a serious crime, a serious felony. And that's where this case is right now, the Deborah Downing case. And I might add, I'm not representing the family. I'm involved in this case as an activist. The same way I was involved in the Amadou Diallo case. I've represented Abner Louima. I've represented victims from Zongo, Sean Bell. I mean, there's 18 families I could list, and I'm not going to do that now, that I've represented whose loved ones have been killed by police. So the serious aspect of this case, the Downing case, is one that you're shining a spotlight on right now, which is really important, to be there every day and to shine a spotlight on the process as we wait for the district attorney to make a decision as to whether or not a grand jury will be impaneled to hear the evidence, and then the people of the Bronx get to make the decision if this police officer should be charged with a crime, and if so, what the crime should be that they're charged with.
That's a great point, because what we see in America, in the injustice system, is the prosecutors may secure an indictment. After the indictment, the police officer who's the defendant might get off at trial. What we saw in the Akai Gurley case was this cop who killed Akai Gurley was found guilty of manslaughter, and the district attorney represented no jail time. So what we need is our elected officials, being the district attorneys, to represent our interests. Perfect example of that was Eric Garner's case. Eric Garner was killed in Staten Island. Staten Island has a lot of conservative folks there who might not be sympathetic to the Black Lives Matter movement. This district attorney failed to prosecute the cop, Daniel Pantaleo, who choked Eric Garner to death, who choked him to death as he screamed, "I can't breathe," 11 times. He successfully failed to prosecute this cop, and the next cycle around, he ran for Congress and was elected, okay? So what I believe is we need to put people in power who will represent our issues. Every corner of this population, every ethnic group, they tend to do this. The Jews do it, the Asians do it, you name the group, even the Latinos here in the Bronx. They elect people who represent their interests. Black people have failed to do that to this point, so this is what we're working on with the Black Lives Caucus.
You just mentioned two cases. One is the Gurley case. My office handled that case. And you know, if you want to go back to the issue of settlement versus trial, in that case, you have a young child that has to be raised by a single mother. The case was settled for $4.5 million. That's a decision the client makes. Do they want to roll the dice and let a jury come back with a decision, or they want to know that the life economically of their child is now secure with a $4.5 million settlement? That's what happened in that case, and it was resolved and settled. So
if it doesn't get settled and you litigate it and you win with the jury, what does that change?
Well, a jury verdict is a statement. And in fact, in the Zongo case, and if I may go back about 12 years or so.
Tell us the facts on Zongo.
Usman Zongo was an African craftsman, worked in Chelsea at a warehouse where he repaired artifacts for other artists, a big group of artists that are storing their art exhibits there from West Africa. And he was a repairman. He fixed stuff that was broken, left 2 children in Burkina Faso, West Africa, and was about to go back home. And a police officer on a search for stolen CDs, nothing to do with him, shot and killed him at the end of a stairwell, so to speak, a hallway. In that case, the case was tried both criminally. Police officer was convicted, only given probation. And on the civil side, the case was settled for $3 million. But again, you have decisions that have to be made by families, 2 young girls that have to be raised. The father's gone. Do you take a jury verdict, or do you resolve a case amicably? So that was the Usman Zongo police killing here in Chelsea.
Okay. Well, that's it for today. I appreciate you coming out, Sanford.
Thank you for having me. And again,
Yes,
thank
indeed.
you for
You giving me your left hand?
Thank you. Well, my right hand was surgical.
Okay.
I had some surgery here.
Yeah.
So I'm cautious. I want to thank you for your work in Black Lives Matter, for shining a spotlight on the wrongdoing so it can be corrected. The same way that federal government integration, desegregation, Voting Rights Act, stepped up to the plate and passed legislation to address problems in our society, in this country. The state has to leave it to the federal government now, the Congress and the House of Representatives and the Senate and the executive branch, the president, to give us legislation, just like the legislation I proposed, to have a federal takeover of the problem of police killing innocent, unarmed civilians.
Thank you. And I'd like to leave you with this. We are still trying to get the grand jury convened by the district attorney in the Bronx. If you want to call her and tell her to convene this grand jury, her phone number is 718-590-8800. That's 718-590-8800. We want her to indict this cop. And I'll leave you all with a chant that we say in the streets. Indict, convict, send those killer cops to jail. This whole damn system is guilty as hell. Peace. Power to the people.